Well, I'll be. If you can read this old chicken scratch, sugar, I'll give you my whole dang ranch. Colonel Benjamin Whitmore hollered from his front porch, waving those yellowed papers like a flag in the hot Texas wind. The big man was practically doubled over, laughing at his own joke, his belly shaking under that fancy white shirt. Mary Grace stood there in the blazing afternoon sun, sweat beading on her forehead, those work-worn hands of hers trembling something fierce. For 15 long years she'd been cleaning this man's house, washing his dishes and keeping his life in order. 15 years of yes sir and no sir, and being treated like she was invisible. Go on now, girl, the colonel shouted to his buddies who'd come by for their weekly poker game. Let's see if this cleaning lady can do what them fancy professors from Austin couldn't. The men slapped their knees, laughing like they'd never heard anything so funny in their lives. But when Mary opened her mouth and started speaking in perfect Latin, reading those ancient documents like they were yesterday's newspaper, that laughter died faster than a campfire in a thunderstorm. The colonel's face went white as cotton, and his jaw dropped so low you could have caught flies. What came out of that humble woman's lips wasn't what anybody expected, and what happened next? Well, honey, it changed that arrogant man's life forever. Because sometimes the good Lord has a way of humbling the proud, and this was going to be one of those times that'd shake this little town right down to its very foundations. That hot July afternoon was about to become the day everything changed at Whitmore Ranch. Now let me tell you about Mary Grace Sullivan, because there's a whole lot more to this woman than meets the eye. 47 years old, carrying herself like she'd been bent by life's storms, but honey, there was steel in that spine that nobody could see. Colonel Benjamin Whitmore owned half the county and acted like he owned the other half too. At 55, he'd built an empire of cattle and cotton that stretched from here to Sunday. His ranch house sat pretty as a picture, all white columns and wraparound porches, looking down on everything like a king's castle. But what that man loved most wasn't his money. No, sir. It was the power to make folks feel small. Listen here, darling, he'd say to anyone who worked for him. Some people are born to lead, and some are born to follow. Ain't no shame in knowing your place. That scorching afternoon, Benjamin was sipping his sweet tea, watching his ranch hands work the cattle. His fingers, fat with gold rings worth more than most folks' houses, drummed against the glass. Mary, where's that woman when I need her? Mary came running from the kitchen, still drying her hands on that old apron she'd been mending for years. Short and round, with graying hair always pulled back tight, she'd been invisible in this house for 15 long years. 15 years of cooking, cleaning, and pretending she didn't hear the cruel things said about the help. I'm here, sir, she said, breathing hard. What do you need? Coffee's cold as yesterday's news. Fix it and make it snappy. Got important company coming. What nobody knew, not even Benjamin himself, was that this humble woman carried secrets that would make any university dean tip his hat with respect. When Mary brought that fresh coffee back, steaming hot and perfect, Colonel Benjamin was hunched over some yellowed papers, scratching his head like a confused schoolboy. These weren't just any old documents. They were family papers he'd inherited from his great-grandfather's estate, written in some foreign language that had stumped every educated person in 3 counties. Dang fool scribblings, he muttered, squinting at the faded ink. Had 3 professors from the university look at these, cost me near $5,000, and not one of them could make heads or tails of it. Mary set down the coffee cup, and for just a split second, so quick you might have missed it, her eyes lingered on those papers. Something flickered across her face, like recognition, like a memory trying to surface from deep waters. But it passed so fast, even she didn't quite catch it. That'll be all? Benjamin dismissed her with a wave, like shooing away a fly. Mary nodded and headed back to the kitchen, but her heart was beating faster than it should have been. Those markings on the paper, they looked familiar somehow. Real familiar, but that was impossible, wasn't it? She was just the housekeeper, just the woman who cleaned toilets and scrubbed floors. Around noon, the visitors started arriving. 5 big shot ranchers pulled up in their fancy trucks, kicking up dust clouds that could be seen for miles. These were the most powerful men in the county, Benjamin's poker buddies and business partners. Well, looky here, hollered Jake Morrison, owner of the Double M Ranch. Benjamin, you're looking fatter than a prize pig at the county fair. They all laughed that hearty laugh of men who'd never known a day of real worry in their lives. The ranchers settled into their chairs on the porch like kings holding court. There was Judge Samuel Carter, who owned more land than some small towns, Pastor Bill Henderson from the mega ranch up north, Tom Williams, the cattle baron, and old Pete Jackson, whose family had been ranching since before the Civil War. "So, Benjamin," Judge Carter said, adjusting his expensive hat, "heard you're still stumped by those old family papers. What's the story there?" Benjamin's face darkened with embarrassment. "Been trying to get 'em translated for months now. Could be worth a fortune for all I know. Maybe deeds to more land, inheritance papers, who knows what. But they're written in some foreign gibberish." That's when Jake Morrison got that mean glint in his eye, the kind that spelled trouble for somebody. "Hey, Benjamin, you tried asking Mary about 'em?" The men looked confused. "Mary, what you getting at, Jake?" "Well, shoot," Jake grinned like a fox in a henhouse. "If them college boys can't read it, maybe someone without all that fancy education can. Sometimes ignorance sees what knowledge misses." The laughter that erupted was cruel and loud. These grown men, supposedly pillars of the community, cackling like schoolyard bullies at the idea of the help solving what professors couldn't. "That's rich," wheezed Tom Williams. "The cleaning lady gonna teach us about ancient languages." Benjamin's eyes lit up with malicious amusement. "You know what, boys? Let's make this interesting." He stood up, papers in hand, voice booming across the ranch. "Mary, get out here, woman." Mary appeared, drying her hands on that worn apron, already sensing trouble in the air like an animal before a storm. "Mary," Benjamin called out with that fake sweetness that made her stomach turn, "come take a look at these old papers here. Think you can make sense of them?" Mary's heart sank like a stone in deep water. She'd been through this dance before, being called over to be the entertainment, the joke, the reason for rich men to laugh. 15 years of swallowing her pride, 15 years of biting her tongue till it bled. I don't know much about reading fancy things, sir," she said quietly, but her voice caught in her throat when she saw those documents up close. The elegant script, the aged parchment, the official seals. Memories stirred in her mind like leaves in a whirlwind. "Course you don't," Jake Morrison slapped his knee. "But hey, if you can somehow read what them professors couldn't, Benjamin here will give you his whole ranch." The men erupted in laughter again. Judge Carter was wiping tears from his eyes. "That's the funniest thing I heard all year, a housekeeper owning Whitmore Ranch." "You're all witnesses," Benjamin declared, waving the papers like a flag. "If Mary here can translate these documents, and I mean really translate them, not just make something up, I'll sign this whole place over to her." Mary felt the world spinning around her. Every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every time she'd been treated like furniture in her own workplace, came crashing down on her shoulders. But something else was happening too. Something that had been buried deep for 20 long years was clawing its way to the surface. "And when she can't," Benjamin continued with a cruel smile, "she'll get down on her knees right here and apologize for wasting our valuable time." That's when Mary felt something break inside her chest. Not break apart, break free. "All right then," Mary said, and her voice had changed. Gone was the trembling, scared woman they'd known for 15 years. Something ancient and powerful had awakened in her soul. "I accept your bet, Colonel Whitmore." The laughter died in their throats like candles in a sudden wind. Benjamin's face went pale as winter snow. You what now?" "I said I accept." Mary reached for the documents with steady hands. The moment her fingers touched that old parchment, it was like touching a live wire. 20 years of buried memories came flooding back like a dam bursting open. She began to read, and what came out of her mouth made every man on that porch freeze like deer in headlights. It wasn't English, it wasn't Spanish. It was perfect, flawless Latin, flowing from her lips like she'd been speaking it her whole life. "In the name of the Republic of Texas, in the year of our Lord 1867, she translated, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Let it be known that the lands called Whitmore Ranch were illegally acquired through forged documentation by one Jeremiah Whitmore, great-grandfather of the current owner." Judge Carter's expensive cigar fell right out of his mouth. "Sweet Lord in heaven," he whispered. That's classical Latin. I studied law and I recognize some of those phrases, but she's translating like it's her native tongue." Benjamin felt his world tilting sideways. "This ain't possible," he stammered. "This just ain't possible." But Mary kept reading, and with every sentence, the truth got uglier. The lands rightfully belonged to the Sullivan family, descendants of the first settlers, who were driven off through threats and falsified deeds. By order of the Texas Land Commission, the property must be returned to the rightful heirs of the Sullivan family. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife. "Mary," Judge Carter's voice was barely a whisper, "how in the Lord's name do you know Latin? Where did you learn to read like that?" Mary looked up from the documents. tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, but tears of 20 years of buried pain, finally seeing daylight. My name, gentlemen, is Dr. Mary Grace Sullivan. I hold a doctorate in history and classical languages from the University of Virginia. I speak 5 languages and specialized in historical land documents for 15 years before I came to work here. The silence that followed was like the moment after lightning strikes, when the whole world holds its breath. These men who'd spent 15 years treating her like she was nothing, who'd made jokes about her ignorance, who'd dismissed her like yesterday's trash, were learning she was more educated than all of them combined. But how? Pastor Henderson stammered. Why have you been working as a housekeeper all these years? Why didn't you ever say anything? Mary's voice broke as she answered. Because 20 years ago, my husband couldn't stand being married to a woman who was smarter than him. Said a wife with too much education was an embarrassment to any man worth his salt. So one night when I came home from the university where I was teaching, the house was empty. She had to stop, the pain too raw even after all these years. He took my 5-year-old daughter Frances, took all my diplomas, my certificates, every document that proved who I was, left me a note saying a woman who thought she was better than her husband didn't deserve to be a mother. Tom Williams was shaking his head in disbelief. Mary, we had no idea. I searched for them for 2 years, she continued, her voice growing stronger. Spent every penny I had on private investigators, lawyers, but they'd vanished like smoke in the wind. When I arrived here 20 years ago, Mary continued, her voice steady now despite the tears, I was broken, and desperate. I had no papers to prove who I was, no references, nothing. Colonel Whitmore offered me work and a roof over my head. I thought it would be temporary, just until I could get back on my feet. Benjamin sat there looking like he'd been struck by lightning. All those years, all those cruel jokes, all those times he'd dismissed her intelligence. But the years kept passing, Mary said, looking directly at him, and every day I had to pretend to be someone I wasn't. Every day I had to bite my tongue when you made mistakes I could have corrected. Every day I had to act ignorant while my heart was breaking. Jake Morrison was wringing his hat in his hands. Mary, all those times all the things we said, the worst part wasn't the work, she interrupted. The worst part was watching you discuss politics, history, literature, subjects I'd taught at university level, and having to stay silent, having to nod and smile when you got basic facts wrong, having to pretend I didn't know better. Judge Carter removed his hat respectfully. Ma'am, how many times did we hurt you without even knowing it? Mary's laugh was bitter as winter wind. Remember last spring when you were arguing about the Civil War dates? You were off by 3 years. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on that period, or when you discussed cattle diseases and blamed the wrong causes. I could have saved you thousands of dollars in vet bills. The men looked at each other with growing shame. Benjamin finally found his voice. Mary, but Dr. Sullivan, all these years you knew about these documents. You knew this ranch. I knew this land belonged to my family long before your great-grandfather stole it, she said firmly. But who would have believed the housekeeper? 3 months after that life-changing day, as Mary was settling into her new role as co-owner of what was now called Sullivan Whitmore Ranch, a dusty car pulled up the long driveway. Mary was on the porch going over financial records when she heard the engine. A young woman stepped out, tall, elegant, with dark hair and eyes that Mary would recognize anywhere, even after 25 years. The woman approached slowly, carrying a briefcase and wearing a professional suit. "Excuse me," the young woman called out, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm looking for Dr. Mary Grace Sullivan. I was told she lives here now." Mary's heart stopped. Those eyes, that voice, the way she tilted her head when she was nervous. "Frances," she whispered, barely able to breathe. The young woman's composure cracked like an eggshell. "Mama? Oh my God, Mama, is it really you?" What happened next was 25 years of heartbreak healing in an instant. Mother and daughter ran to each other across that Texas dust, crying like their hearts might burst from joy and pain all mixed together. "My baby girl," Mary sobbed, holding Frances like she might disappear again. "I never stopped looking for you, never stopped praying I'd see you again. I know, Mama," Frances cried. "I know. I've been searching for you too. It took me 7 years, but I found you." They sat on the porch steps, holding hands like Frances was still that 5-year-old little girl. "Tell me everything, honey. Tell me about your life." Frances took a shaky breath. "Daddy raised me on lies, Mama. Said you abandoned us. Said you didn't want me anymore. But when I turned 18, I started asking questions. Things didn't add up. Mary's heart ached for all the years of confusion her daughter must have endured. I became a lawyer, Mama, specialized in family law, partly hoping I'd find a way to track you down. Mama, Frances continued, opening her briefcase with trembling hands, when I turned 21, I hired a private investigator. We discovered Daddy had been using your credentials to teach at universities under false pretenses. He'd been living off your reputation for years while you were here suffering. Mary felt a mix of anger and vindication wash over her. What happened to him, honey? I turned him in, Mama. He's serving 8 years for identity theft and fraud, and I recovered all your original documents, your diplomas, certificates, everything he stole. Frances pulled out a folder thick with official papers. You can reclaim your academic career if you want to. Mary looked at those documents that represented her former life, then gazed out over the ranch that had become her true home. You know what, sweetheart? I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. 2 years later, the transformation was complete. The Sullivan Whitmore Ranch had become a model operation. Fair wages, profit sharing, educational opportunities for workers' children. Benjamin Whitmore, humbled by his experience, had become Mary's most trusted partner and closest friend. The University of Texas had approached Mary about establishing a research center on the ranch, combining agricultural science with historical preservation. Frances had moved home to help run the legal aspects of their growing enterprise. You know what the most beautiful part of this whole story is, Mary said one evening as she and Frances sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky gold and red. What's that, Mama? For 25 years, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered, but the Lord had a different plan. He was preparing me for something bigger than I ever imagined. Frances squeezed her mother's hand. You saved this ranch, Mama. You saved all these families who depend on it. No, baby girl, Mary smiled, tears of joy streaming down her weathered face. This ranch saved me. Mary Grace Sullivan's story proves that no matter how deep we fall, no matter how long we suffer in silence, our true worth can never be destroyed. For 25 years, she endured humiliation, heartbreak, and the pain of hiding who she really was. But when the moment came to show her strength, she didn't just reclaim her dignity, she transformed an entire community and became a beacon of hope for others. Her journey teaches us that our darkest moments often prepare us for our greatest victories. Every tear she shed, every cruel word she endured, every night she cried alone, it all had a purpose. Sometimes we have to lose everything to discover what we're truly made of. Sometimes we have to be broken before we can become unbreakable. What about you? Are you hiding your true potential because others have made you feel small? Are you letting past wounds keep you from claiming the future you deserve? How many dreams have you buried because someone told you that you weren't good enough? Mary's story is proof that it's never too late to reclaim your power, never too late to show the world who you really are, and never too late to turn your pain into purpose. Don't let this inspiration fade away. Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to keep getting stories that will fuel your transformation. And click on the video appearing on your screen right now. Husband kicks her out for cheating. 6 years later, she returns with the truth that changes everything. Another incredible story of transformation that will remind you that your current situation is not your final destination.